Welcome, dearly beloved anointed ones. The problem with plotting against a chosen one is that you're not just fighting a person, you're picking a fight with their purpose. Let that sink in. Because if you've ever watched someone try to sabotage a soul with divine backing, you know it always ends the same way, with their jaw on the floor and karma flipping the script like a plot twist they never saw coming. See, what they didn't know is this. A chosen one isn't someone who wins all the time. No, it's far more terrifying than that. A chosen one is someone who can't be erased, no matter how many times life hits delete. Here's a fact that might blow your mind. The US military once conducted a psychological study on resilience under extreme pressure, and they discovered a rare kind of individual who not only survives intense stress, but performs better during chaos. Guess what? The patterns they found match the spiritual DNA of people like you, the ones who keep rising when everything should have crushed them, the ones who walk out of betrayal like it was just a traffic bump. Now imagine this. They built entire schemes to break you, only to find out you don't break. You rebuild in silence and return upgraded like a divine iOS update nobody asked for, but now everyone's copying. They wanted a downfall, but got a front row seat to your uprising. And now they're stuck with that awkward realization. Wait, they weren't the weak one. We were just underestimating a warrior in disguise. So buckle up. Because in this video, we're about to unpack exactly how they found out the hard way that you can't be beat, broken, or buried. Because your calling comes with a clause that says, return to sender, failure not accepted. Let's get into it. Number one, they mistook your stillness for surrender. Not knowing you were in spiritual calculation mode, they thought your stillness meant you gave up, that you were defeated, that you had nothing left in you. Because in their mind, silence equals surrender. When you didn't fight back, when you pulled away, when you went quiet, they assumed they won. What they didn't realize is that you weren't retreating, you were recalculating. You were in spiritual calculation mode. You weren't folding, you were observing, listening, discerning, watching everything unfold in real time and taking mental notes they didn't know you were capable of keeping. You were tracking their patterns, their behavior, their inconsistencies, and storing it all like ammunition. See, you don't move on impulse. You move with intention. And while they were laughing, celebrating, and thinking you were crushed, you were letting divine intelligence guide your next steps. They didn't understand that stillness is a weapon in the hands of the wise. And you were learning how to fight battles that didn't require yelling, proving, or chasing. You were sharpening your discernment. Because chosen ones don't just survive storms, they study them. And that's exactly what you were doing. They found out the hard way that your silence wasn't weakness. It was spiritual surveillance. You were reading energy, feeling shifts, recognizing fake smiles, decoding passive aggression. You were letting the noise pass while you tuned into a higher frequency. You didn't react because you were calculating consequences. You didn't confront because you knew timing would do a better job than your words ever could. And here's the part that really stings them. By the time they realized what you were doing, it was too late. You were already 10 steps ahead, already built stronger, already healed deeper, already unbothered by the very drama they hoped would break you. They underestimated you because they confused your strategy for surrender, and that's where they messed up. Because now they know you're not to be played with. You're not the type to lose your mind over chaos. You're the type to sit in the silence, take it all in, and come back with power, clarity, and spiritual backing that can't be touched. They didn't realize you were being quiet for a reason, but trust, now they do, and they'll never forget it. Number two, they tried to undermine you before realizing you were operating from a frequency they couldn't hack. They threw everything at you: lies, setups, fake smiles, smear campaigns, gossip, isolation tactics, and still you didn't fall. They couldn't understand it. To them, you should have broken down by now. You should have snapped, retaliated, or at the very least disappeared, but you didn't. You kept showing up, you kept shining. And that's when they started to realize something that terrified them. You weren't operating from the same system as them. You weren't built on the approval of others, or the clout, or the fake applause. You weren't depending on people's validation to function. Your foundation was something they couldn't touch, because it wasn't rooted in this world. They finally saw that the tools they used, the manipulation, the gaslighting, the pressure, they don't work on someone whose power comes from a source they can't access. You were walking with divine encryption. They couldn't decode your peace, couldn't understand your bounce back, couldn't figure out why the usual tricks didn't get the usual results. That's because your frequency is spiritual, not social. You don't move according to trends, attention, or who likes you today. You move by intuition, protection, and divine instruction. You're built on something they'll never be able to buy, fake, or steal. What really bothered them was that you didn't need to clap back. You didn't need a crowd. You didn't even need to explain yourself. You let them watch you elevate in real time, while their tactics bounced off of you like rubber bullets against a fortress. You weren't ignoring them because you were scared. You were untouchable because you were covered. What they threw at you got intercepted before it could even touch your purpose. They tried to drag your name through the dirt and accidentally made you more visible. They tried to silence you and ended up putting a spotlight on your resilience. And the more they attacked, the more confused they got. Because no matter what they did, you just wouldn't fall. That's when it hit them. They were fighting someone spiritually armored, someone chosen, someone who isn't powered by ego, but by alignment. They thought you were ordinary until they saw their weapons malfunction on you, and now they know they were never fighting alone. They were going up against something sacred, and they lost. Number 3, they thought you were a threat because you fought back. Then they learned you were a threat because you didn't have to. They saw you take hits and keep walking, and instead of respecting your strength, they tried to test it. They thought the real threat was when you spoke up, stood your ground, or clapped back. But what really shook them, what truly made them uncomfortable, was that you didn't always respond. You didn't always defend yourself. You didn't always match their chaos. And that's when they started to get nervous because they expected noise. But what they got was power wrapped in calm. They didn't understand that your silence wasn't a weakness, it was a warning. You weren't scared, you were just done wasting energy on people who already decided who they wanted you to be. They tried to bait you into arguments, drama, and low-level nonsense, hoping you'd react and prove their twisted narrative right. But you didn't move, you knew better. You didn't fight every battle because you already knew how the story ended. They weren't expecting that kind of restraint. They weren't prepared for someone who could stand in the fire and not even flinch. That's when the fear kicked in, because now they knew your power isn't in how loud you are, it's in how you don't have to say a word and still dominate the room. It's in how you carry yourself, how you recover without a show, how you forgive without begging for closure. They thought your quiet meant you lost, but the truth is they lost the moment you stopped giving them access to your energy. What really hit them was the realization that you could have ruined them. You could have exposed everything. You could have clapped back in a way that would have shut it all down, but you didn't. And that shook them to their core. Because that kind of power, the kind that chooses not to destroy when it easily could, that's the kind that can't be manipulated. That's the kind of strength they can't copy or control. You weren't the threat because you fought back. You were the threat because you didn't need to. That's when they understood who they were really dealing with. Someone chosen, someone disciplined, someone dangerous in silence. And that realization came too late. Number 4, they laughed at you publicly only to be haunted by you privately. They laughed at you when you were down, like your pain was a punchline. They performed for the crowd, cracking jokes, throwing shade, and twisting your struggle into entertainment. To them, you were the easy target. You were the one who didn't clap back, the one who took the hits and kept walking. So they kept going, thinking they were winning, thinking they were relevant because they had you to mock. But the spotlight they used to humiliate you became a mirror they couldn't avoid when the crowd disappeared. Because when the noise faded and the rooms got quiet, they were left alone with their own conscience. And that's where the haunting began. Your face, your resilience, your silence, it followed them. Not in a spooky way, but in the kind of way that makes someone question who they really are when no one's watching. You never retaliated, you never exposed them. But the way you carried yourself after everything, they couldn't escape it. Your endurance did what your words never had to. It revealed their pettiness, their bitterness, their emptiness. They started remembering the details they ignored at first. The way you still showed kindness when they were cruel, the way you stood tall without needing attention, the way you kept going when everything in your life was falling apart. And suddenly, their laughter didn't feel so satisfying anymore. It felt hollow, forced, fake, because deep down they knew it didn't come from strength, it came from insecurity. Your existence started reminding them of everything they lacked: integrity, humility, peace. You didn't need revenge, your growth became it. Your consistency became the judgment. Your strength became the exposure. Now they try to avoid your name. They get uncomfortable when your story is mentioned. Because you didn't just survive, you became undeniable. And that kind of transformation doesn't just silence your enemies, it convicts them. They thought mocking you gave them power, but all it did was dig a hole they ended up stuck in. Meanwhile, you kept rising, and now, whether they admit it or not, they're haunted by what they tried to bury. Because you didn't just make it, you became a reminder that they were wrong. And that's the kind of truth they can't laugh away. Number 5. They thought breaking you would be easy, but they didn't know you were built in fire, not fabricated in comfort. They looked at you and thought you'd be easy to break. You didn't move loud. You didn't bark back. You weren't fueled by ego or the need to prove yourself, so they thought that meant you had no fight in you. They mistook your grace for naivety, your empathy for weakness, and your quiet strength for a lack of power. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't even begin to understand, is that you weren't built in comfort. You were forged in chaos, hardened in heat, pressed in pressure. They didn't see the nights you cried in silence while still waking up the next morning to push forward like nothing happened. They weren't there when you had nothing but still gave. They didn't see how you survived betrayal, abandonment, and spiritual warfare without losing your heart. Your softness wasn't a lack of armor, it was discipline. It was restraint. It was the kind of strength that doesn't need a stage to validate it. You were raised by storms, and that's why storms don't scare you. While they were learning to perform for attention, you were learning how to stand in fire without burning. While they were busy curating images, you were quietly rebuilding from ashes. You don't crumble when it gets hard, because hard is where you were born. You didn't learn survival from books. You lived it every day and came out the other side sharper, wiser, and more spiritually lethal than they ever expected. That's why they're confused now. Because everything they threw at you, the disrespect, the losses, the chaos, you carried it and still didn't collapse. They thought comfort builds resilience, but you knew better. Comfort builds ego, fire builds substance, and you're made of substance. That's why their attacks didn't work. That's why they couldn't shake you. Because you weren't held together by attention or applause, you were held together by a calling. They thought breaking you would be easy, but they were fighting someone trained in darkness, tested by pain, and still chose light. You didn't come from privilege, you came from pressure. And that's exactly why you don't just survive, you stand unshaken every single time. Number 6. They realized too late that you were their mirror, and what they did to you revealed who they really were. They didn't know what they were really doing when they came for you. To them it was just drama, just ego, just another target to tear down. But what they didn't realize until it was far too late is that you were never just a target. You were a mirror, and everything they did to you exposed something about them that they were desperate to hide. Your resilience exposed how fragile they truly were. While you stood your ground, they folded behind fake confidence and performative strength. You moved with grace, even under pressure, and that alone made them uncomfortable, because your ability to remain centered highlighted their instability. Your self-control made their impulsiveness louder. Your calm presence revealed how chaotic their spirit really was. And that contrast, it rattled them. They needed you to break. They needed you to fall apart so they could feel intact. But the more you stayed whole, the more their insecurities started showing. Every attempt to discredit you, every smear campaign, every underhanded jab wasn't just about you. It was a public confession, a loud, messy confession that said, I don't know who I am without tearing you down. That's the part they can't erase. You weren't just surviving, you were evolving in plain sight. And with every step up you took, it exposed how deeply they had rooted themselves in jealousy and bitterness. They weren't just watching you, they were studying you, obsessing over you, secretly measuring themselves against someone they claimed to hate. But hate is loud when admiration is forbidden. They couldn't compete, so they tried to corrupt. And when that failed, they unraveled. What they did to you ended up revealing everything they tried to hide about themselves, their envy, their fear, their emotional immaturity. While you stayed grounded, they got exposed, not by your hands, but by the truth your presence made unavoidable. You never had to fight them directly. They lost when they tried to destroy a mirror and ended up shattering their own reflection, and now they can't unsee it. Number 7, they wanted your fall so bad, they didn't realize they were tied to your elevation. They were so focused on trying to ruin you, they didn't realize how deeply they were tying themselves to your rise. Their obsession became a form of attachment. Every whisper, every scheme, every attempt to humiliate or discredit you was actually cementing their place in your story. Not as victors, but as proof that what was meant for you could not be stopped. The more they tried to block your path, the more they unknowingly helped build it. They weren't smart enough to see that you were never operating on their level. While they were playing petty games in the dark, you were aligned with something higher. They thought they could slow you down by surrounding your name with chaos, but all they did was give your story more weight. And when you started rising, they had no choice but to rise too, but not in the way they wanted. They didn't rise in victory, they rose in exposure. They became unwilling witnesses to the very breakthrough they tried to block. Your elevation didn't just reveal your power, it revealed their weakness. And the irony is, without them trying so hard to see you fall, they wouldn't have been front row to the rise. They wanted to be the reason you failed. Instead, they became evidence that you couldn't be stopped. Their hatred gave your journey context. Their envy gave it fuel. Their sabotage became the staircase. Every trap they set was another step you used to level up. They were too busy watching you to realize they were now part of your testimony. So when you ascended, publicly, powerfully, and without apology, they had to sit there and choke on every intention, every prediction, every lie they spread, because they didn't just bet against you, they staked their entire identity on your downfall. And when that failed, they didn't just lose, they faded. They couldn't stop your rise because they didn't build it. God did, and in trying to sabotage your path, they became the very proof of your calling. You were the staircase, you were the test, and they failed it publicly. Now they watch you walk into everything they said you'd never have, realizing too late that their efforts only secured your victory. Number 8, they finally understood. You weren't competing, you were completing a divine assignment. They spent so much time trying to outrun you, outshine you, and outdo you, but what they didn't realize was you were never even in the race. You were never competing for their spot, their attention, or their recognition. While they were caught up in the noise of comparison, you were moving in silence, syncing with something much higher. You weren't chasing validation, you were answering a call. And that terrified them, even if they couldn't admit it. They were running themselves ragged, trying to beat you in a game you weren't even playing. While they measured wins by applause and visibility, you measured progress by peace and alignment. You didn't need the spotlight because you were the light. You didn't care about being first because you were focused on being faithful to the mission, to the growth, to the purpose placed on your life. You were never concerned with who was watching. You were only concerned with staying in sync with your assignment. That's why they kept getting frustrated. You didn't flinch when they tried to provoke you. You didn't get thrown off when they threw shade. You didn't need to match their pace because your elevation was scheduled, not negotiated. It wasn't something they could block because it didn't come from the same system they were operating in. They were grinding for position. You were being positioned by divine design. Eventually it hit them. You weren't their competition. You were their revelation. Your presence exposed the fact that all their striving, comparing, and self-promotion was rooted in insecurity. Meanwhile, you were moving with clarity and conviction, not noise. They realized too late that you weren't interested in winning against them. You were focused on fulfilling something eternal. And while they were stuck watching the clock, you were already crossing the threshold into purpose. They thought you were just quiet, but the truth is you were chosen, and no amount of effort, envy, or ego could replicate that. You didn't come to compete, you came to complete something heaven assigned you to finish. And once they saw that, they knew they were never your rival. Just background noise in a much bigger calling. Number 9. They learned painfully that what didn't kill you made you a spiritual weapon. They thought breaking you would be the end of you, but all they did was trigger a transformation they couldn't reverse. What was supposed to kill you only made you sharper, wiser, and spiritually dangerous. The old version of you, the one who second-guessed, who gave too many chances, who still believed they could be saved while they were stabbing you, died in the fire they lit. And what rose from those ashes wasn't just stronger, it was unshakable. You don't just survive anymore. You dismantle, not with revenge, not with rage, but with presence, with power, with peace that can't be faked or fabricated. The kind of peace that comes from being dragged through every kind of pain and still walking away with your soul intact. You became a living contradiction to their expectations because they wanted you broken, but they ended up feeding your evolution. You carry the memory of every fire, every betrayal, every loss, not as a burden but as armor. You don't have to announce your strength. It enters the room before you do. They feel it in their chest when you speak. They feel it in their guilt when you stay silent. Because your spirit has weight now. It carries echoes of every battle you didn't just survive, but conquered. And that's what disturbs them most. You didn't need revenge. Your healing was enough. Your glow-up, your elevation, your wisdom, they weren't just side effects of survival. They were the evidence that the weapon formed against you not only failed, it forged you. Now you walk into rooms and shift the entire atmosphere. People feel something when you arrive. That's not intimidation, that's spiritual authority. You became a soul with gravity, a presence too heavy for shallow minds and too pure for manipulative hearts. They didn't realize the pain they caused would become your training ground. They made you their target, but now you've become a mirror, a message, a movement. What didn't kill you didn't just make you stronger, it made you undeniable. A spiritual weapon with a purpose they'll never be able to duplicate or destroy. Number 10. They didn't realize you were the lesson until you became the standard. They thought you were disposable, replaceable, easy to figure out and easier to forget. So they mishandled you like they had time to circle back, like you'd always be there, waiting just in case they changed their mind. They didn't see the depth. They didn't recognize the rarity. They only saw what their ego let them see. And by the time they realized what they lost, it was too late. You weren't just another connection. You were the lesson, the experience meant to grow them, mature them, stretch their spirit. But instead of learning, they tried to dominate. Instead of appreciating, they tried to compete. Instead of honoring you, they tried to dim you. And now that you're gone, they're stuck chasing your ghost in every empty imitation that comes after. They didn't just lose you, they lost access to the blueprint. Now they scroll through timelines, study your energy, try to mimic your light. They copy your style, your words, your posture, but it never lands the same. Because what you carry can't be duplicated. It wasn't learned in books or crafted through aesthetics. It was lived. It was earned in silence, in suffering, in sacred alignment. That's why everything you do feels authentic, and everything they do now feels forced. You weren't a trend. You weren't part of some spiritual aesthetic they could borrow from. You were truth, raw, healing, confrontational truth in human form. And truth can't be played with. It either transforms you or it offends you. They chose offense, they chose ego. And in doing so, they rejected the very light that was trying to elevate them. But now they're watching you from a distance. And what's worse than being blocked out of someone's life is being blocked out of their evolution. You've become the standard they can't reach, not because you're above them, but because you kept rising when they chose to stay small. You moved with depth while they chased approval. You became the reference point, the reminder, the one that got away, not romantically, but spiritually. They didn't just lose someone special, they lost the key to their next level. And now they're haunted not by your absence, but by what your presence revealed about them. Number 11, they wanted to trigger you, but ended up exposing their own weak spots. They really thought they had you figured out. Thought if they just pushed the right buttons, you'd explode, break down, spiral something. They were hoping for a reaction because they needed one. It would justify their own chaos. It would validate the twisted image they had of you in their heads. But the silence you gave them, the stillness, that rattled them more than any outburst ever could. They didn't realize that every time they tried to trigger you, they were exposing themselves. With every snide comment, every subtle jab, every manipulative move, they weren't revealing your flaws. They were putting their own emotional instability on display. They were trying to get a rise out of someone who had already outgrown the need to prove anything. And that's what made them unravel. Your lack of reaction wasn't passivity, it was mastery. You weren't ignoring them, you were observing, diagnosing, letting them show you exactly who they were without lifting a single emotional finger. While they were busy trying to find cracks in your armor, they didn't notice their own armor falling apart. The truth is, they needed your reaction like oxygen, because without it, they were left choking on their own projections. They expected drama, they got discernment. They expected war, they got wisdom. And that's what cut them deeper than any clapback ever could. You didn't match their energy, you revealed it. Like an X-ray, your calm presence showed every fracture in their spirit, every insecurity they tried to hide, every wound they refused to heal. And now they don't know what to do with the silence, because it's not just quiet, it's reflective, it's exposing. It's the kind of silence that shows just how loud their dysfunction really is when no one's playing along. You stopped being their mirror and became their microscope. And the closer they looked, the more they saw what was truly broken, and it wasn't you. You were never the one spiraling. You were the one diagnosing the storm, and that's why they'll never try you the same way again. Because now they know you don't explode, you elevate. And your elevation is the very thing they can't fake, manipulate, or control. Number 12. They found out the hard way that favor isn't fair, but it's final. They were watching you like a hawk, waiting for your downfall like it was scheduled. Every setback you experienced, they treated like confirmation that you were finished. They whispered, smirked, and assumed you'd stay stuck. They measured your progress with their limited perspective, completely unaware that grace doesn't move on their timeline or play by their rules. They thought consistency would be your weakness, that too many blows would eventually make you crumble. But what they couldn't see, what they never understood, is that favor doesn't need explanation. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't submit to popularity, position, or predictions. Favor is divine, and yours, it's not just active, it's final. You didn't just bounce back, you leapt. Every time life knocked you down, something sacred pushed you forward. It wasn't luck, it wasn't coincidence, it was orchestration, it was alignment. And while they were keeping score based on how many times you lost, heaven was writing a storyline where every loss turned into prophecy. They didn't realize the very things that were supposed to disqualify you were the same things God used to qualify you. The pain, that was preparation. The betrayal, that was redirection. The delays, divine timing. And when you started to rise, not through their systems, but through grace, they couldn't understand it. They couldn't grasp how someone they looked down on was now being elevated beyond their reach. They assumed your scars would shame you. But those scars became your passport, proof you've been places, survived things, and carry wisdom they can't fake or fabricate. And their confusion? That was the poetry. That was justice. That was what made it all hit harder, because favor never needed their approval, but now it demands their attention. You became the living proof that God's hand doesn't need a vote, that grace doesn't need a platform, it is the platform. And now they have to sit in the reality they created for you, only to watch you rise out of it completely untouched. Favor isn't fair, it's final. And for them, watching your elevation wasn't just uncomfortable, it was the consequence of betting against someone God already said yes to. Number 13, they thought they had time to destroy you, but you were on heaven's clock. They operated like they had all the time in the world to take you down, like their manipulations, delays, and detours would eventually wear you out. They thought if they kept throwing obstacles, if they kept slandering your name, if they kept playing petty games behind the scenes, they could stall your purpose. But what they didn't know was, you weren't moving by their clock. You were on heaven's time, and heaven doesn't delay for drama. While they wasted energy on schemes, you were being prepared in silence. While they were planning your demise, divine timing was planning your unveiling. What they mistook as stagnation in your life was actually sacred alignment. You weren't stuck, you were being positioned. You weren't late, you were being launched. And when your moment came, it didn't come like a whisper, it came like a wave. Suddenly, doors opened that they swore were closed to you. Suddenly, the opportunities they tried to block showed up at your feet with your name already written in favor. And it wasn't random, it was acceleration, the kind only heaven can authorize. It was restoration for everything they stole, delayed, or tried to destroy. It was vindication for every time you stayed silent while they smeared your name in circles too small to contain your future. They were dragging your name in gossip rooms while the universe was engraving it into the gates of destiny. They thought they were slowing you down, but they were just speeding up your timeline, because the truth is, they gave heaven every reason to move on your behalf. Every betrayal was a receipt, every delay was a setup. Every lie was evidence that the story being written about you would need divine publication, and now it's being read by everyone who once doubted your worth. You didn't miss your moment. You were reserved for it. And when it came with everything they tried to block: clarity, power, recognition, and peace. They thought they had time, but you weren't working with time, you were working with timing, and divine timing is never early, never late, just unstoppable. Number 14. They learned you're not just hard to kill, you multiply in the midst of attacks. They thought the attacks would finish you, thought if they threw enough dirt on your name, shut enough doors, created enough chaos, you'd finally disappear. But instead of breaking down, you multiplied. They didn't realize they weren't silencing you, they were spreading you. Like a seed buried deep, the pressure didn't kill you, it activated you. Every betrayal, every rejection, every calculated smear only accelerated your growth. They thought you'd shrink. They thought you'd fold under the weight. But what they didn't understand is you were made for pressure. You were designed to thrive in places others drown in. While they were trying to bury your presence, they unintentionally expanded your reach. Their hate gave you momentum. Their jealousy gave you a stage. Their sabotage gave you strategy. You didn't just survive, you took over. Quietly, strategically, spiritually. While they were obsessed with blocking your elevation, they never noticed you were building beneath the surface. You grew in the dark, you healed in the shadows. And when you finally rose, you didn't come back the same. You came back multiplied. More clarity, more favor, more fire. And none of it came from applause. It came from adversity. Their attacks became your marketing. Their gossip became your promotion. Without knowing it, they became your press team, shouting your name louder than your allies ever could. And that's the irony that eats them alive. They made you visible. They gave you reach. They built the stage they swore you'd never stand on. Because God will use even your enemies as the architects of your rise. You didn't grow in spite of the war. You grew because of it. And now your existence alone is a threat, not because you're loud, but because you're rooted, not because you're perfect, but because you can't be erased. You're a walking reminder that divine purpose can't be cancelled by human opinion. So now they watch you multiply where they expected to see ruins. And deep down, they know they should have never touched you. Because every strike, every scheme, every attempt to destroy you only proved one thing. You're not just hard to kill, you're impossible to stop. They found out the hard way, but by then it was too late. They mocked, poked, and schemed, thinking you were just another name they could discredit and forget. But they didn't realize you were built differently. You were never in this to impress them. You were moving on divine orders. You weren't reacting to their chaos, you were being refined by it. Every trap they set became a training ground. Every insult they threw became a brick in the foundation of your legacy. While they were performing for attention, you were transforming in silence. That's why your rise didn't come with noise. It came with undeniability. You were never just fighting for survival. You were stepping into purpose. They thought they were playing chess, but they were pawns in a much higher strategy. A strategy that had you positioned to win, not by manipulation, but by alignment. What they thought would break you only built you. What they hoped would silence you only amplified your voice. And the more they tried to erase you, the more visible and validated you became. Your scars, they're your credentials. Your silence, it wasn't weakness, it was discernment. Your resilience didn't just speak. It shouted that favor doesn't follow logic, it follows calling. And now they're left wrestling with a truth they tried to avoid. You weren't just someone passing through their story. You were the moment their story shifted, and not in their favor. The ones who laughed are now quiet. The ones who dismissed you are watching. The ones who tried to drag you down are now forced to witness you elevate beyond their reach. And it's not revenge, it's revelation. You didn't need to clap back. You became the clap back. Your life, your peace, your fruit, all of it is speaking louder than any argument ever could. They thought they had time. They thought they had control. They thought they had you figured out. But what they never had was access to the divine assignment that chose you. Now they see it clearly. You weren't created to compete. You were crafted to conquer. And no weapon they formed could touch what was sealed in purpose before they even knew your name. So let them sit in the silence of your absence, haunted by the brilliance they tried to dim, because in the end you didn't just win, you became the lesson, and lessons, when they're true, don't get forgotten. They get remembered, revered, and replayed over and over again. If this message hit your spirit, don't just sit with it, move with it. Tap that like button if you felt seen. Drop a comment if you're done apologizing for your power. Share this with someone who forgot who they are and needs that wake-up call today. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe, because this space, it's not just a channel, it's a movement for the chosen, the misjudged, and the unstoppable. Turn on your notifications too, because when truth drops, you don't want to be the last to catch it. Let's shake the algorithm with authenticity. Let's drown out the noise with truth. Stay blessed.